Hey there everyone, welcome back to Observe. In today's video we're going to be analyzing the nonverbal communication of Johnny Depp during his testimony and talking about his nonverbal patterns that we see throughout that and how they compare to Amber Heard's in my previous video. Now, I know that there has been a lot of development in the case and I will be getting to those pieces as well, but I did want to go ahead and show both sides of this so that we can have our due diligence on that front. Enough of that, let's go ahead and roll the intro. And then we'll get going. Today's video is sponsored by a longtime friend and supporter of the channel, NordVPN. It may be true that many people are aware of the general use of NordVPN, but in case you aren't, I'll let you know the most regularly used features that I benefit from and use on a day-to-day basis. After that, I would like to fill you in on a handy new feature that the people over at NordVPN have implemented for us. First, as many of you have probably heard, I've moved out of Seattle into the rural countryside of Washington, which is beautiful, don't get me wrong, but the internet at my house is almost unusably slow. So with that in mind, I do a lot of my research and work at coffee shops where I can be connected to higher speed internet. While I'm doing that, I use NordVPN whenever I'm hooking up to one of those public networks so that I can benefit from their security wall of next generation encryption. This keeps my personal data safe and private while I am connected to this less secure style of network. The second most common way that I personally use NordVPN is that I use it to connect to its over 5,400 different servers located across 59 different countries. What I mean by that is that I can connect to one of these servers and it more or less tricks the internet into believing that I am somewhere else in the world rather than where I am. That allows me to be able to enjoy the internet without limits or borders, so to speak. However, these features are rather well known. NordVPN has taken its level of protection and security and upgraded it even further to what they refer to as threat protection. Threat protection steps up your cybersecurity first on Nord's desktop app. Once it is activated, it protects you from malicious sites, downloads, trackers, and even intrusive ads. Even better, threat protection is constantly on the lookout for these threats, even if you're not actually connected to a VPN at that time. With that in mind, you can now browse the internet with a higher sense of safety using NordVPN's numerous security features, like I said, including their new threat protection. So take control of your internet experience today with NordVPN. You can get a 2-year plan at a huge discount with an additional month for free if you sign up using the link in the description below, and that is nordvpn.com/observe. It's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guaranteed, so there's no worry there. Again, that's nordvpn.com/observe, or you can click the link in the description below. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and back to our regularly scheduled programming. For those of you who have not watched the other videos in this small series that we have been doing here, I suggest you go and check those out for a little bit more context. We will be relying on some of the information found in those videos during this video as well, so please keep that in mind. Now, what we're going to be watching here is Depp's recollection of a certain instance that him and Amber had, and it can be difficult to listen to for some people, so just be aware of that. I have done what I can to try to maintain community guidelines as best as I can, but it is still what it is. So that's enough of that. Let's go ahead and dive in.
How did it come to be that your finger became injured?
There was at one point where I'd stayed in one of the, sitting on a bathroom floor, door locked, she's banging away, screaming, blah, 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 and then suddenly she stopped.
Okay, I'm gonna make a couple notes about how Johnny delivers dialogue. He has this halting tone throughout all of his dialogue. It is consistent here as well. So that does lead me to believe that this is still resting within his normal baseline. That also being said, he is a trained on-screen talent, so that does kind of have to be thrown into question in general. How much is he actually controlling? There are some psychological factors that kind of differentiate being an actor and trying to pull off a lie or a guise on stand, but it is still something to consider. So along with that, we've heard him switch in between tenses here about how he was sitting on the floor, and he does a smile there as well, which we found in the first video in the series that is something that Depp does in regards to some of the more dark history that he has. It's that smiling response. Many of you were able to relate in the comments as well. So we see that popping up there in regards to him sitting there on the floor. Then he switches tense and saying that she's banging on the door and switches tense again. So this tense switching might be an indicator of deceit. Doubtful here due to the narrative that he's painting here. It's very storybook-esque, so it has that tense change in there, which adds a little bit of flair. But it is still something to make note of. Let's continue.
And I could hear her walk away. And I left the place, the room that I was hiding in, or not hiding, locked myself into. And I went downstairs in the house. Downstairs in the house.
So when he's talking about that room that he left, he has some disgust creep into his face. And then he also says, not hiding, I locked myself into. So there's something around that instance that I would be led to believe that he probably feels disgust on. And it seems to be centered around his own activity, that leaving or that hiding somewhere in there, he has a level of disgust, and the only thing that's being talked about there was his own actions. I'm curious to know what that would be, but that would just be more a peek into Depp's mind rather than something that's applicable to this. So let's continue.
As soon as you walk in the house, you can go upstairs or downstairs. Downstairs, there was a sort of a rec area, pool table and such, and there was a bar.
I'm going to go ahead and pause that here because he has done some important things. First, while he's talking about the spatial aspects of the location, he is using spatial gestures as well. This encourages me to believe that he's talking authentically. He's being authentic here in that he is remembering spatially as well. Is that a guaranteed? Absolutely not, but it does push me towards his authenticity. Now, what he also does during that time is he does a quick scan of the room to see if everybody's understanding what he's saying about the location of things and how it's described, making sure that everybody's following along with. This is something that comes naturally to people, and it's to make sure that what you are conveying is being clearly presented. That's important to note because that specific patterning actually shows up in Amber Heard's entire testimony as she scans the room repeatedly to see if her emotions are landing or falling appropriately on the people around. This is a red flag because that means that she's so focused on her own display and how it's being received, checking in on the faces of the people around, especially with the jury, that you get the feeling that she's not actually feeling those emotions. Which then also comes out in that area of desynchronization, feeling like they're acting through some sort of petroleum jelly, thick substance kind of thing. So when we see that coming up there, it makes sense in Johnny Depp's case. It doesn't make as much sense in Amber Heard's case. Johnny Depp's describing an area, and Heard is trying to portray an emotion, but they're both trying to feed off the audience. That's fascinating. Now we're going to watch Johnny start to get into the actual meat of the matter.
And I was a mess. I was a wreck. I was shaking, and I just didn't understand why all this was happening. So I went behind the bar. I grabbed a bottle of vodka that was there and a shot glass and sat at the bar. She was nowhere around. And I poured myself 2 or 3 stiff shots of the vodka. First taste of alcohol I'd had in a long time. And then she came down to the bar and found me there. And of course started screaming, "Oh, you're drinking again, yeah, the monster," and all that.
Okay, so I'm still paying attention to where he's looking, when he's looking, how he's emoting during those times, and kind of what that pushes me to believe. So during the times that he's talking about his emotional state or something that might be a little bit more difficult, he seems to hone in into this space, this nebulous space, which is very common to see a person recollect in that way. So as he's doing that, he's kind of focused into that space, and then you can see him pop out of it a bit. Even non-verbally, he kind of shifts a bit and he looks up and he talks about pouring himself a stiff couple of drinks, and then he starts to hone back in again once it starts to get to the emotional side of things. So seeing that come in, that does lead me to believe that he is emoting genuinely, authentically in those areas. So the consternation that we're seeing, that is genuine consternation, at least as backed up by this small cluster. And along with that, we see this disgust and such come into his face when he starts talking about Heard's reactions towards him. That seems to be a little bit amplified, but that does also make sense with what he's saying as well. So anyways, long story short, right now he is still being authentic from what I can tell. Let's continue forward.
So she walked up to me and reached and grabbed the bottle of vodka, and then just kind of stood back and then hurled it at me, and it just went right past my head and smashed behind me.
During this time, all of his illustrators are accurate to how the flow of things would go. He hasn't shown any mix-ups between hands or sides or anything that might indicate that he tried to make it up. Now, like I said, he's an actor, so he could have maybe rehearsed this, but we see quite clearly that just because you are an actor doesn't mean that you can be good at lying on a stand. So in this area, I feel like he is still being genuine and authentic, not only by the spatial illustrators, but by the fact that he has maintained his synchronization all the way throughout. Let's continue watching.
So I stood up and I walked behind the bar, and there was a larger bottle of vodka, the kind with the handle, you know, on it. I grabbed that and I went and I sat in my seat again.
So this is an odd area of Depp's nonverbal communication where he just goes and continues doing more of a gesture than needs to be there, and that is something that has popped up in his past before. He has odd quirks about his nonverbal communication that come up, and there are a number of reasons for that, but because we have seen them pre-existing before and have established that they are part of his baseline, we know that it's not an indicator of possible deceit or desynchronization here. So that is important to note. But along with that, he is still using very, very prevalent illustrators. I'm wondering if he was coached to continue to do so or to push to do so, because it's very, very verbose. That is interesting to me, but let's continue.
I opened the bottle and I poured myself a shot and drank it. Miss Heard was flinging insults left, right, and center, and she then grabbed that bottle and threw that at me. And the way that the bar was situated and where Miss Heard was. So if I could show you, so if this is the bar where the glass.
Pause it here. Obviously, we saw a whole blip there of Amber, and she remained very, very still the entire time. Very astutely blank expression. All that it's letting us know is that she's being very, very guarded with her emotions. It makes sense. So let's continue.
And the bottles, if this was the bar and I was sitting here like this, she would grab the bottle and she would go there. She went there. And so I was leaning like this in the chair, looking at her. First bottle went, then got the other bottle, shot, takes the second bottle, which was the larger one. I'm in this position again, and my hand is on the edge of the bar, like that, you know, leaning over, the fingers like that, and she threw the large bottle, and it made contact and shattered everywhere. And I honestly didn't feel the pain.
Okay, so during this entire time of his recollection, everything has maintained spatial consistency while he's speaking of it. And his ability to remember spatial memories like this encourages me to believe that he is still being authentic. Let's continue watching.
At first at all. I felt no pain whatsoever. What I felt was, I felt heat. I felt heat, and I felt as if something were dripping down my hand, you know. And then I looked down and realized that the tip of my finger had been severed, and I was looking directly at my bones sticking out, and the meaty portion of the inside of your finger, and blood was just pouring out.
So we can see again as he's talking about these fairly difficult instances in his past, we see the small smile slip in there in response to the morbid nature of his conversation, and that does, as we said, fit with his baseline that has come up repeatedly. It's not an area of deceit, aka he's not doing something like Duper's Delight or along those lines. So fascinating to see it come up through here. As he's continuing to recollect this, he's still maintaining this look into space as he's remembering everything and gesturing spatially. These all still push me to believe that he's being authentic during his recollection of this.
And at that point, I think that I went into some sort of, I don't know what a nervous breakdown feels like, but that's probably the closest that I've ever been.
So all that I can note there on Heard's face is that she does have a little bit more activity in the corners of her nose, in the area of perhaps disgust. It could be related to emotion as well. As somebody starts to possibly cry, they will develop a stiff upper lip. Maybe that's what's showing up there. It doesn't seem quite like it because the action is resting a little higher here instead of being a freezing of this area. So with that in mind, if that's disgust coming through, that would line up as well. But since it is constant, it doesn't waver much, I'm not gonna say for sure they're holding disgust right there. But it is something that pops up, so optimistically, in the courtroom itself, we would be able to continue watching her to see how the contextual body language lines up with what we're seeing at that time. Let's continue.
Nothing made sense. And I knew in my mind and in my heart, this is not life. This is not life. No one should have to go through this.
Which finger was cut, Mr. Depp?
It's the middle, it's the funny looking one. It's the middle finger here. You can see you can see all the sort of, from the initial wound, all these bones up here were crushed, and it looked like Vesuvius, you know. And so this part of my finger now is, so that because of not having use of the tip here, this is basically arthritis that kicks into the joint once that upper part of the finger is mangled.
So is that the right middle finger?
Right middle, yes.
And is that your dominant hand?
Yes, it is, yes.
Mr. Depp, after...
That was a lot of information that was kind of packed into a fairly simplistic question. But in this area, since it's immediately backed up with physical evidence that's showing that he's not really lying about anything, then we could see that that would be maybe perhaps related to nerves. There could be a reason that he gave that extra amount of information. If we did not have that physical thing that showed that he was legitimately being honest in that area, then you would want to ask questions, because packing and packing and packing can mean nervousness. And if you're nervous, why? Why are you nervous in that question? So with that, that would have been a red flag. Since he has the evidence, then it's not a red flag, so we'll have to continue watching.
Ms. Heard threw the vodka bottle at you and severed your finger. What, if anything, did she say when she saw the injury?
I don't recall anything, but just, it was almost like white noise, just someone yelling. It was just a high-pitched, constant attack of insults. It was just jumbled words to me in a very...
Okay, so here I'm interested. As he's continuing to try to remember, he goes through a very, very overt remembering expression. The cluster, the lowering and drawing together of the eyebrows, the narrowing of the eyes, all of it showing this concentration as he's working mentally to try to access the auditory of that time. And as he's talking about the white noise, it just sounds like perhaps somebody who has had several shots of alcohol and then went through a fairly traumatic event might be feeling some symptoms of shock. But then he starts to say, with the insults and everything like that, that part sticks out to me as interesting, because that doesn't fit with everything else. He was saying it was white noise, now he's saying with the insults and everything. And then he continues to try to wrap it up by this jumbled, chaotic mess. So during that time, there's that possibility that he's trying to hang a little bit more responsibility or a little bit more dirt on Heard by saying in the insults, but I don't really have enough evidence to actually say that, so it's something that I have to just keep my eye on and continue forward with.
In a very high frequency, and I was in a bit of shock, you know.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to show you a picture. If we could please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 145. Mr. Depp, what is this a picture of?
That is, that's me in the emergency room. And I see a detail that I'd forgotten, which is Ms. Heard had taken my cigarette from the ashtray and stomped it out in my face here.
Could you mark on the screen where you see that?
It's right above that green dot.
And do you know who took this picture?
I do not know.
Can we please publish this to the jury?
Do you want to enter into evidence?
Yes, please.
Any objection? No, Your Honor. All right, 145 in evidence. You can publish to the jury.
And so, Mr. Depp, now that the jury can see the photograph, can you again explain what that green dot is identifying?
Just above the...
Real quick here, as he was talking about that instance, again, we saw the smirk in regards to a traumatic event in his past, still fitting on brand. Along with that, we're seeing here physical evidence of what he's saying. So far, synchronization and accurate spatial memory, those do still push me to believe he's authentic. Let's continue watching the rest of this.
Well, just above the green dot is a wound from Ms. Heard taking my cigarette, and this is after the finger gone away. And she stubbed it out in my face, and on my cheek.
If we could please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 343. And for the record, this is an audio recording, and it's quite lengthy, so we intend to play certain portions of it.
It's just get out of that situation while it's happening before it gets worse. Once you're like, I lost it, my finger. At least 5 bathrooms and 2 bedrooms. To escape the fight. You don't escape the fight, you escape the solution. You escape the solution. Escape figuring out, we cannot work it out. You go to the bathroom. Listen to me. Why don't you have the 12 rounds without any break? I'm not doing it right. You did it. No. There were rounds, man, and like, it's super scary. The rest was important. All I'm saying is, you can't have a solution if the argument just keeps mounting. I go to the bathroom, sit on the floor. Bam, you come. I come out. Fight, crazy, escalated. I go straight down to another bathroom, bedroom, something. Bang. You kept coming to get me. I'm not going to close. Passing. That's why it does not make it together. That's does not mean you come out. Just because you're racist does not mean you come out. I'm not saying that. You're saying that. You're doing worse enough and being non-separate. No, you're trying to justify how you don't come to the door. I'm justifying how you think that there's powers and you don't identify you. And you're justifying that. Okay, cool. I'm not going to. I said you. Wait, don't just happen. You guys just go to that. No, just happen. You said. You you're not punched. No, you didn't punch. Not right like this. I not punch you. I not deck you. I didn't you. I don't know what promotion. My actual hands was. But you're fine. I not hurt you. I not punch you. I was hitting you. How am I supposed to do this? I'm not supposed to do that. You are. That's different from me and you. You are like a baby. Oh, Johnny. I did start to fight. Yes, you did the right thing. The big thing. You're admirable.
So, pausing it here, obviously I cut a portion of this. There's an entire segment where there's a discussion between Amber and Johnny, and it can be a triggering portion, so I wanted to go ahead and take that off of YouTube, keep it from being demonetized, and put it over on Patreon. If you do want to see it, it's at the lowest tier. I think it's $1 or something like that, and you can go and watch that and see it there. During that time, we hear a lot of psychological banter between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, as Johnny is talking about these instances where he's trying to avoid a confrontation, and oftentimes a physical confrontation. And then at the very, very end, it wraps up with Amber Heard verbatim saying, "I did not punch you, I hit you. It doesn't matter what my hand shape was like. You're not that hurt, you're fine." Calling him a baby, so on and so forth. It is interesting that in this defamation trial, we have audio evidence of Amber herself confirming that she's physically abusive. But let's continue watching this. We'll see how the rest of this plays out.
Mr. Depp, could you please explain to the jury what they just heard on those audio recordings?
What was displayed on the audio recordings was...
Okay, so when he is spoken to initially, Depp snaps to attention. He was obviously living in a moment or remembering something along those lines, that sharp shift there. And then we hear his voice has a little bit of difficulty coming in, so we could reasonably say that he was feeling an emotion at that time as well. According to his face, it would be consternation, perhaps anger, perhaps anguish, pain, fear, a variety in that area with the eyebrows and eyes. And now, as he's starting to speak, we're seeing a very small frame from him, and this is not a verbose or dominating position. It's very small. And then it cuts to Amber, and we see that Amber has her chin raised a bit, looking almost perhaps defiantly until she looks down and around to the sides. Perhaps there's an indicator that says, oh, this camera is now live. I'm not sure why that look down into the side happened to happen so quickly after a camera switched to Heard, but that small point of defiance that was there before, that chin raised, this is, I'm not threatened, I'm in control, and try me. So with that being there as well, I find that interesting. For her to be having this defiance in relation to what we just heard is also interesting. Regardless, let's continue watching and then we'll wrap up.
Was very much the tone and the aggression and the attitude and the need for a fight from Ms. Heard. That was, I don't know if that was some need for attention, but that was a sound. It, that was a sound that I had gotten very used to.
Says that need for attention. She does a little bit of a slower blink. You see her eyes move around a bit. That would be just a small level of agitation from Heard in regards to Depp calling out perhaps some childish behavior on her part. Just find that interesting that that still slips through despite the very astutely blank face that she is attempting to keep. Let's continue.
The squabbling, the raising of the voice to essentially excommunicate anything that I had to say about the situation.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop that here. Like I said, there is a lot more to this case. I have been able to get a little bit faster internet, working on faster still, but I should be able to start picking up more and more. There have been some interesting things that have been tagged on in social media in regards to this, so I think my best suggestion for y'all is to buckle up. Now, in regards to this specifically, throughout that, what we did see from Johnny was synchronization. He had excellent spatial memory, and it was very consistent as he's talking about items, where they went, how things were laid out in rooms, and how he interacted with them. While he was speaking about his emotive or emotional states, he kept his gaze in this space here as he tried to recollect various aspects. We would also see the classic memory expression come across with the lowering of his eyebrows and the narrowing of his eyes. And all of this pushes us to believe in authenticity in this area. Now, contrasting that to what we watched in the last video with Amber, as they were trying to display certain emotions and invoke certain emotions, but it was falling semi-flat. And then watching them consistently scan around the room to see if the emotion that they're displaying is indeed invoking the response that is needed really also lets you know that this is a performance rather than an actual genuine felt thing at that time. Now, there is a lot of other detail that goes into this case. So with this video under the belt, I feel like Johnny is still being synchronized and authentic, whereas Amber has shown some areas of desynchronization and inauthenticity, both in dialogue, the actual words she said, and her nonverbal communication. So let me know what you feel in the comments below. If I've missed something or if you want to be able to see another aspect, let me know in the comments below as well. You can start reaching out here soon to my socials. As I said, I'm gonna be starting to interact with those or have people help me interact with those here soon. I also have a PO box that is now over in the description of the channel and in each video as well. So if you want to send something my way, now you can. No promises that I will. I don't know. I've never done this, so we'll see how it goes. But that is all that I have for today. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome as you always are. And I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.